The secret to messy texturized hair. I use the word secret in the title because YouTube seems to favor these like outlandish claims. They like dramatic statements and things, but it's really less of a secret and more of a list of ingredients and processes along the way to get that cool, messy, texturized look, which I clearly don't have. I deliberately didn't style my hair today for this because I wanted to be able to differentiate messy hair that like you legitimately woke up and did nothing versus like cool messy hair. What's the difference? And how do you get that difference? So anybody who wants to make fun of my hair in this video, you're not clever. I deliberately didn't do it. And I'm not really in the business of having cool hair. I'm in the business of doing cool hair. There are a lot of misconceptions about the processes and ingredients involved in getting that casual, messy look. So I want to kind of demystify what goes into messy hair that you'll see on a screen, like in a movie or a hair ad or something, when you see that really cool messy hair versus what I have going on. Back when I was a new hairstylist, like 2004 to 2009, really messy hair was really cool. And back then the thing was to get a razor cut. Like you had to request a razor cut because if you got a razor cut, your hair was super jagged and crazy. And then after we'd get this razor cut, we'd go to the grocery store and buy some kind of wax stick or like Murray's pomade, and we'd glue our hair up into spikes and wonder why our texture didn't look as cool as it did when we left the salon. Even at one point I thought, well, I'm not using the product the salon's using. And I went and I bought the product they were using. I overused it and I still had spiky hair where I wanted just messy texture. And so these days I see a lot of that like kind of spiky hair where seemed like they were probably going for more of an aloof, casual, messy texture. Or I see a lot of like deliberately pieced out, like they'll take every piece of hair and piece it out and it ends up looking like anime hair. And you know, if either of those looks are what you're going for, whether it's spikes or anime hair or whatever, like that's cool if that's what you're going for. But, and I hope not to offend anybody saying this, I feel like a lot of times it's like a misguided attempt at more casual, messy hair. Like we want to have pieces and chunks and movement, and so we'll sit and glue them in there with product, and it just misses the mark. It looks a little bit too deliberate, a little bit too try hard. The thing is with cool, messy hair is it's a little bit of work up front, the right work, and then it's no work for days, and it just looks better and better as it falls apart. So first let's characterize what makes up this look, this kind of messy, casual, aloof hairstyle look that happens to accidentally look good. It's not simply an imperfect haircut. A lot of people think that a texturized cut is when you just go crazy with the scissors or the texturizing shears or the razor and you just bash it all up. It's not really an imperfect cut. It still has to have some shape to it and some intention to it. And it's also not a haircut where you just go crazy bashing it with thinning scissors. Texturizing and thinning are kind of related, but they're not always the exact same thing. And a lot of people will just say, oh, can you take the thinning scissors through my hair? I want to have that texturized look. You don't get it from just bashing your hair with the thinners. What you'll see in the look is hair that basically moves freely, like really soft, flowy hair that kind of naturally wants to separate into these shards and spikes and pieces, but is still like soft to the touch, still blows in the wind, and at the same time still kind of holds some shape and some volume to it. It's like this weird, mystical, magical, perfect hair that seems impossible to achieve, where it just wants to fall back into a nice shape that happens to be messy and perfectly pieced apart. You can see a little bit of air in between the hair here and there. And then like you run your fingers through it and it still does that. And so what we're seeing is honestly hair that moves, and hair that moves apart and strategically and specifically to where pieces just kind of do their own thing. It doesn't all act the same. It's not like a wall of hair. It's an area of more or less chaos, controlled chaos, if you would call it that. But it's also not spikes. It's not so overloaded with product that it looks stiff or hard or shiny. So the first ingredient that goes into this look is going to be the natural texture of your hair. This is your genetics. This is what God has blessed you with. Some people have hair that is very smooth naturally. Some people have hair that's very rough and coarse naturally. If you were to look at your hair under a microscope, anybody's hair, it's kind of made up with like scales on the surface. And on some hair textures, these scales are somewhat lifted up. And what happens when these scales are kind of lifted is, for one, you don't have a smooth flat surface for light to reflect off of, and so your hair doesn't shine as much as it could. But also, all these rough surfaces tend to kind of catch on each other and wad up. And this is where we get frizz, when you just get a whole bunch of hair that just sticks to each other in a weird way that you don't like, and it's not very shiny, it's kind of like frizzy. This is frizz. And so some people naturally have hair where the texture of each strand is very smooth. Some people just have that naturally shiny hair. And what this smoother texture allows the hair to do is move independently without sticking to each other. And so when the wind blows, a piece of hair can fall instead of the whole wad of frizzy hair just wobbling. Now, if you do have this smoother hair texture, it means that to get these kinds of looks, you need to put in a little bit less effort than the next guy up front. However, this smoother hair can tend to look really greasy really easily. If you go a day or two without shampooing it, it's very easy for this hair to look greasy. But on the flip side, if you have very coarse hair, you're gonna have to put more work up front with styling and whatnot, and I'll get more into that later. But on the positive side, if you have this more coarse hair, is after you put in all the work to style it, your hair will actually look better and better after 3 to 4 days of not shampooing it. And so you can kind of tell about your own hair texture just by how far you can get away with not shampooing it. If it looks greasy and gross like mine after 2 days, you probably have pretty smooth hair texture. If you can go 4 or 5 days and it's just starting to look better and better, probably got some dry, coarse hair texture. That's the first factor that's gonna play into messy hair looking good and deliberate versus messy hair that just looks like messy hair, is the hair texture you start with. And that's really going to like differentiate the process and the products you'll wanna use to get the look. Is kind of assessing where your own hair is and what the needs are, what it's lacking. And we'll go through all of that through this video. So the second ingredient is the cut. A lot of people have this kind of idea, as I already mentioned, that a texturized haircut is just a chaotic cut with no shape, where things are just crazy. Or they think that it's just taking the thinning scissors all over the head a whole bunch. Yes, going crazy and taking pieces and chunks out of the hair and losing the shape is a very texturized cut. It could be kind of free form and artistic. And also bashing hair with the thinners is a form of texturizing, but it's not good. It doesn't really give you control. And so the first thing about the haircut is it does have to have some kind of shape. You cannot just throw the shape out the window and just make a bunch of jagged pieces of hair fit randomly on the head. It has to have some kind of shape, and that is one huge key difference between randomly woke up hair. See, there's no shape here. I got a little bit of piece sticking up here. I got some out here. There's no balance to it. This side of my head's flat. But when you look at a messy hairstyle where you're like, oh, that's messy and it looks kind of cool, one of the underlying factors that you're seeing that makes it look cool is that it is fitting a nice clean shape. There's some deliberate properties to it to make it pleasing to the eye. It's proportional, it's got some balance, there's some symmetry, some composition involved. And that completely comes from the haircut. If you have a good shapely haircut and then it is texturized, it will look good when it's messy. If you have just randomness and it's sitting oddly in different ways, it's not gonna look good. It's not gonna have that little something extra to it that makes it acceptable to have messy hair. It's gonna be just messy hair like I have. So the other thing involving the cut is the technique you use to texturize. And so I want you to imagine that I have a stack of papers that's even all the way across. If I take that stack and I wobble it, it's gonna flex in both directions just as easily. Now, if I took that same stack of paper and I staggered it so that one side was considerably longer, it's gonna fall very easily to one side and it's not gonna fall very easily to the other side. This is a concept that kind of represents a massive foundation to haircutting. When you cut those jagged points in a haircut, you are controlling the way that it will bend through the same way that that paper wanted to bend one way but not the other. Now, thoughtfully, strategically texturized hair is cut in a way that every little snip, every little Bart Simpson spike that you're putting in there is going to coerce the hair to act in a certain way. If you have very fine hair and you take very fine little pieces out, you're gonna end up with like a wispy look and it's gonna look kind of fine and feathery. But at the same time, if you have very coarse, thick hair and you take out big chunks, you're gonna have holes in your haircut. And so it's matching up the right technique to the right hair texture for the right outcome, and knowing that short hairs are gonna act like short hairs, which means the hairs you cut shorter, the hairs that you cut shorter are gonna wanna bend less than the longer hairs, because that's what hairs do. When they're shorter, they don't bend as much, and they're more rigid. And so those shorter hairs are gonna act like shorter hairs and wanna stick out, while the longer hairs are responsible for the shape of that haircut. And it's knowing how short to cut those shorter hairs and which direction to angle the little texture spikes to control the outcome of the haircut. Now, when you just go in with texturizing scissors and bash everything down randomly, there's no control there. All those short hairs just want to stick out. And you can actually, by just bashing it with the thinners, you can make hair more frizzy and bigger and just a big mess, because you have all these little short hairs that don't know where they want to go. And it's very much like a stark opposition to hair that is texturized thoughtfully and strategically. Now I'm going to do more videos about how to do the cutting, texturizing techniques and how to understand all this, but just for our intents and purposes here, know that the haircut is very, very much responsible for the difference between my hair and cool hair. So the third ingredient to get this kind of cool, messy, texturized look is the blow dry. What blow drying your hair will do is give your style a foundation. It'll tell your hairs exactly where you want them to go, and it'll make them stubbornly want to go there. Now, when I say stubbornly, think about this. We all know that our hair can do horrible things to us, like mine is doing today. My little bed head here will not lay down. And we've all had bed head that does that. It's like if it wants to stick up, it's going to stick up. You know, when you put on a hat, you get that dent around here, and that dent is like almost impossible to get out. You can't just comb it out. You can't put product in it and make that dent go away. Our hair can do very horrible things to us, holding on to these horrible characteristics when we wake up or wear a hat or whatever. And we know this. We know about the worst of our hair, the worst that it could do for us. But what a lot of us don't realize is that that same strength, that same stubbornness that we fight against can actually be controlled and used to our advantage, to our benefit, to make the hair stubbornly want to hold whatever shape we put it into. And the hair dryer is what causes that. So when you have bed head or hat hair and you just can't get it out with a comb or with product, the way you get it out is by shampooing your hair, right? And so the same thing is if you do a good solid blow dry and you're directing that heat at the roots and you're controlling your hair around, you're going to get your hair to stubbornly hold whatever shape you put it into. Depending on the techniques you use, the blow dry can also control how much bend you leave in the hair or take out of the hair. You can straighten curly hair, you can curl straight hair, you can absolutely control like every aspect of your hair. I don't want to go into like specific techniques or details in this video, but check the link in my description. I have a few styling videos about how to use the blow dryer. So the second thing that the hair dryer is going to do is it's going to smooth out the surface of your hair. So as I mentioned earlier, if you already have smooth hair, it's kind of easy to get that messy, jagged look. But if you have very coarse or rough hair, you have to smooth out the surface of your hair. And the way that you do that is with the blow dryer, or if your hair is bad enough, you do it with a flat iron. So what heat does to the hair, on top of just setting it into holding whatever shape you put it into, is it'll actually smooth out the surface of each hair, as I talked about earlier. And the smooth surfaces reflect more light, so your hair will shine, and they don't stick to each other, so your hair will move nicely. And this is such a key thing. I get a lot of clients, maybe not a lot, but it happens sometimes, where clients will come in, whether it's their first or second visit, and I can tell that the hair's been texturized before. And during the consultation, they'll say, hey, can you like really texturize it? Like, I want to see more texture. And I can already tell that it's been texturized. What I do in that case is before I even take out scissors, I say, hang on, let me show you something. And then I blow dry their hair, and I show them how texturized it actually can be if they blow dry it. And then they go, oh. Like, we think that the cut is so important to get this jagged, messy look, and it is a huge factor. Let me be clear. It is, but if you don't have that smooth surface on your hair, you're not gonna see the texture. And so whether you have to blow dry your hair to get that smooth surface or whether you have it naturally, if the surfaces of your hair are rough, you're not gonna see that separation, you're not gonna see that movement. And this is probably the most important ingredient. I can't tell you how many times I've blow dried someone's hair and it's puffy and it's poofy. And what happens is all this magic I'm talking about with the smooth cuticle and the shine and the texture and everything, that actually happens a few minutes after the hair is dry. And so I'll be blow drying somebody's hair and they're seeing their puffy, usual poofy hair. And then after a couple minutes, they go, oh my gosh, my hair's never looked like that before. And they see it start to shine, and they see it start to move differently, and they see it start to, it transforms into like a different texture of hair almost. And now, before any of you wise guys go to the comments and tell my followers that I'm giving bad advice because the hair dryer will damage your hair, check the link in my description and you'll find a video where I actually deliberately tried to damage hair with a hair dryer, and I show you just how hard it is to damage short hair with a hair dryer. If you're really worried you're going to damage your hair, just buy a heat protectant. There's a million of them out there by a million different companies, and they all work, they all do their job. But realistically, on short hair, you're not going to damage it with a hair dryer. You're going to trim it off before you damage it. If you've got very long hair, then maybe worry about it. So the fourth ingredient is your hair product. You'll want to get something water-based for sure. The thing is, if you use something that's wax-based or oil-based, then the last step, the blow dry, is literally impossible to do. That stubborn memory that your hair can take on through a blow dry, it can't do if it's wet. It has to completely dry. And so imagine like a lip balm, it's oil-based or wax-based or whatever, you put it on your lips and it keeps your lips moist. Now if you put oil or wax in your hair and it kind of traps in this moisture that you can't blow dry out, your hair will not set. Back in the day when my friends and I used to all use Murray's in our hair, all my friends with curly hair would like flat iron it and blow dry it and everything and get it straight, and then they put Murray's in it, and by the end of the day it curled up again. And so you definitely want to avoid an oil or wax-based product because you will not be able to set it with the hair dryer. And now if you have that smooth texture that we talked about before to where you don't really have to blow dry it to get that cool texturized look, you still want to avoid an oil or wax-based product because, as I mentioned, if you have that smooth texture, it's very easy for your hair to look greasy. So you definitely don't want to put any kind of grease in it, right? If you have that really smooth texture to your hair that we've talked about, you're going to want to add something to your hair that's going to make it a little bit more sticky and gritty feeling because your hair's too smooth. And especially if you were to blow dry it a whole bunch and it's already too smooth, it's very likely that it's just going to lay down flat. So I recommend a water-based product with a matte finish if you have that type of hair. And the way that I like to describe it is like as a pre-styler, that will make your hair bigger when you blow dry it. It causes those really smooth surfaces that normally would just glide against each other and fall down, it'll cause them to kind of stick to each other a little bit more, and it adds texture to your hair. Now on the flip side, if you have that very coarse hair and your hair is sticking to itself too much and you're getting frizz, you want something that's glossy and water-based. What this will do is add a little bit of shine to the hair as it's smoothing down that cuticle, and it'll just kind of help everything to be a little bit sleeker looking. And since the hair naturally already is typically more coarse, if you have this type of hair, it'll want to stand up a little more anyway, so it doesn't need as much of that grip to hold itself up. And also, a lot of times if the hair is coarse enough, even after you smooth it out with a blow dryer, it still won't shine quite that much. And so, basically to summarize the product thing, if you have very smooth hair that can tend to look greasy, you definitely want to use a matte product that's water-based. If you have hair that tends to be more coarse and big and poofy and frizzy, you want a glossy product. And I typically like to use both of these as a pre-styler, and then sometimes very little at the end just for a little bit more structure in the style. Now let me be very, very clear here about something. Any product you use for these looks, the goal is not to use the product to put the hair where you want it. A lot of guys have this idea that that's what product is meant to do. Like, oh, you put this in your hair, and then you comb it there, and then that's where it stays. That's not how you get this look. You will absolutely not get this look if you do that. If you use product to control your hair, you're going to look slicked and greasy, and you can have absolutely a cool hairstyle, but you're gonna lose this look. It's not a magic product that will hold your hair softly into place and give it cool texture. It's all these other things we just talked about. It's getting the right cut, it's blow drying it up, and then it's using just enough product to kind of add a finish to really emphasize and work with your own natural texture to get the result you want. And so here's the results we ultimately want from our product. Imagine that you have one individual hair, and I'm like, hey, one individual hair, stand up. And I'll blow dry it up and everything, but then under its own weight, it falls down, right? But if I took like 10 hairs or 100 hairs and I blow dried them all up, and then I just made them a little bit sticky so they stick to each other, now they're gonna hold each other up. And so when you see this like magical, unachievable hair online, on movies, on wherever, to where it's volumized and it's moving and it's in pieces and shards, and it's like, and then the guy runs his hands through it and it stays up, and it's like, oh my gosh, what product did that? It's not the product, it's the haircut. It's those little hairs helping the hair to lift up. It's the blow dry. It's setting that stubborn nature of your hair to hold itself up for you. And then it's a little bit of finish with the product, causing the hairs to stick together more or less and shine a little more or shine a little less depending on the texture you have. And all of this stuff working together to get that kind of magic messy hair that just moves nicely and falls back into place easily. So now as I'm wrapping up, I'm going to leave you with one last tip about texturized hair, and then I'm going to follow it with a big fat disclaimer. So the tip is this. If you have light colored hair, you will see a lot of texture in your hair. You will see every cut, every snip, every shard of hair. When you move it, you'll see each of those pieces move. But if you have very dark hair, you're not going to see it as much. Something that happens somewhat frequently is I'll have a client come in and they show me a picture of somebody with bleached out hair that's very texturized looking, and they go, I want this. And then I have to warn them before we even start cutting. I'm like, look, I can cut your hair just like that. I can style it just like that. But I have to warn you, you might feel a little let down because his looks so crazy and texturized because it's blonde. And especially if you have like dark roots growing underneath, and so you can see the contrast of these blonde ends spiking about everywhere, laying over dark roots. Then when you have that happening, it's like texture city. On top of that, not just the color of your hair, if you have any kind of processed hair, like bleached hair, colored hair, permed hair, when you process hair, it takes that surface we were talking about and it'll take your smooth hair and it'll make it rougher. People, and we used to do this back in the scene days, we would bleach our hair actually and then immediately color it dark again because we wanted to get that messed up rough texture from the processed hair so we could style our hair bigger, but we also didn't want to have blonde hair, and so we'd color it dark right away. And so know that when you bleach your hair or process your hair in any kind of way, it's going to make the texture pop like crazy. Like all those crazy, crazy blonde texturized cuts you see, part of the reason they look so epic is because they're blonde. It just adds so much to this type of look. Now for the disclaimer. I just told you to cut your hair all jagged, whatever. I just told you to blow dry your hair all the time. I just told you to bleach your hair. And somebody somewhere is gonna say, oh, all these people are gonna damage their hair because of you, Andrew. No, this is my disclaimer. Don't go bleach your own hair. Don't try to cut your own hair. Don't blow dry your hair 5 times a day. Ultimately, you need to go sit with somebody who sees hair all day, every day, and they'll know how much your hair can take. I blow dry hair every day that I'm at work, and almost every day somebody has bleached hair in the chair. And I know because I've touched 10,000 heads how much the hair can take. Like there's certain people, they'll come in and I'm like, I'm not gonna blow dry your hair, that's gonna break off. And so if you're worried about that, don't do what I'm saying, go talk to your professional. Even if you're not worried about it, still talk to your professional because they know your hair better than I know your hair. I can't see your hair, I can't touch your hair. And so if you think I'm sitting here telling people to go damage their hair, no, what I'm telling people to do is keep this stuff in mind and then talk to your professional to see how it works for you. Say, can my hair take a bleach and a blow dry every day? And honestly, don't take my advice, take your professional's advice. Anyways, thanks for watching. If you guys liked this at all, if you got anything out of it, please like and subscribe and all of that stuff. If you don't like it, do not miss that thumbs down button. Like you can't miss it, it's right there.